This morning I'm here with Barry Lander, a former NCBC president, to talk about his term of office and some issues with the NCBC. So, Barry, good to have you with me this morning.
Thank you, Mary Lynn. Good to be here.
Let's talk about your employment with the bankruptcy court. When did you start and what positions have you held?
Ancient history, huh? I came into the federal courts in 1981 as clerk of the bankruptcy appellate panels of the Ninth Circuit, part of the grand bankruptcy code experiment. Was there for about 3 years, and then the Marathon Pipeline decision came down and questioned the constitutionality of the new bankruptcy courts. I was sure that the bankruptcy courts would exist, but I wasn't sure whether the bankruptcy appellate panels were going to exist. So I had an opportunity to become the chief deputy clerk in the Eastern District of California Bankruptcy Court, Richard Heltzel, a former president of NCBC. And I went up there from 84 to 89, and then I became clerk in the Southern District of California.
And you still hold that position?
Still hold that position for over 20 years.
All right. When did you become involved with the NCBC?
At different levels. While I was with Richard was president of NCBC. That was in that transition period where it was moving from being a clerks-only institution, which is how it was originally created. As the bankruptcy courts were a new institution, the clerk of the bankruptcy court was a new institution. It used to be a chief clerk under the old Bankruptcy Act. So I was sort of tangentially involved while I was in Sacramento. But when I came to San Diego, the NCBC held a couple of conferences combined with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. Those are rather large conferences with a lot of educational opportunities. So I justified in my own head under the Training Act, sending my staff to those conferences. We always did that in my state court days, and so I started sending staff to the NACM NCBC combined programs, one of which was in Albuquerque, one of which was in Washington. That was actually my first battles with Washington, was my funding of those people to go to those workshops, and actually had a successful battle on that one, ultimately leading to the court allocation fund getting created. So initially it was about sending people and attending. And in the late 90s, I started getting involved in the education program because I had been a trainer for the FJC my whole career. That was my background before coming to the courts. Was I worked at the University of Southern California in management training. So I got involved in the education program, and I think probably the modern times version of that really sort of kicked off probably at the Maryland conference in Annapolis in the late 90s. They had started to grow. They had great education programs when they were combined with NACM, because NACM had thousands of dollars in sponsorship money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they were bringing in great faculty. It's a little bit harder for NCBC to pull that off in that period of time. So I got involved in the education program. In 2000, we hosted what was then the largest conference. We had over 300 people come out to San Diego for the NCBC conference in 2000. It's the first time we ever broke with numbers like that by ourselves. And have been involved pretty much ever since until I became president.
Now, I believe that conference in 2000 was basically when CMECF was reviewed.
Yeah, we had a couple of advantages. We were a prototype court, so we had been involved with the development of CMECF from about 97, 98 on. We were able to show it to people. We actually set up a CMECF lab, so it was the first time people had an opportunity to see the new case management system that was coming our way. So we had the location, and we had the automation program everybody wanted to see, and I think that led to a lot of the attendance at the NCBC conference. The other thing was that was when the court allocation fund finally got adopted, which allowed courts to justify sending people to association meetings for the education program. That was critical to I think the growth of NCBC and FCCA for that matter, although I think the bankruptcy courts caught on to that a lot faster. And that helped. I mean, it created an exception. That training act that I was relying on to send people to NACM and to those NCBC combined workshops, apparently it's one of those statutes where the judiciary is not included. It has always been okay to send executive branch people to association meetings for the education program. But the judiciary wasn't included in that, and that's when Director Meekum pretty much pushed general counsel to create this opening.
Now, were the joint workshops prior to NCBC opening membership to deputy clerks or after?
It was after. Yeah, I was sending regular staff to those workshops.
Now, you said that you were working with Richard in those early years. Obviously, the first few years that you were working with him, NCBC was a clerks-only organization.
Yeah, and I wasn't involved much at all.
Was he one of the proponents of opening it to deputy clerks? I know that there was quite a controversy there.
It was David Byrd and Richard. I think David Byrd was president, Richard was vice president, president-elect, so it was right in that window.
Yes.
And so I think it might have been the last thing David did, sort of like MSU, the Michigan State Program and Judicial Administration Program. Wayne met with Maureen and then handed it off to me because he knew he was leaving office. I think there was that transition between David and Richard on the deputy clerk thing. So Richard was involved in sort of like getting those programs in place. And then I was really good friends with Bob Wiley, who might have been the next president after Richard. I can't remember the sequence at all. And I'm not sure I necessarily want to, thinking about it for a moment. Just remembering who's come and gone. But Bob and I were very close too. And so I had a certain commitment to Bob. Bob was president when we were with Nacon in Washington, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. What were some of the issues that NCBC was involved in at that time, and especially after the deputy clerks were allowed to become full members? What was the NCBC?
Yeah, my involvement was so minimal, but what I think was going on at that time was the development of the insurance programs. They sort of came online, but I know that was something that I heard Bob talking about a lot at the conference. So I wasn't on the board or anything. I was just a member involved in education in those days. So I know there were those issues. There's always funding issues and such. In the early years when it was the clerks only, they basically met with the director. I mean, that was kind of their conference. They would almost always, I think, meet in Washington in those days. And it sort of was a sort of a non-educational, more political advocacy role in those days for the new institution in the federal courts.
Right. I can remember in the early days of being able to attend as a deputy clerk that the educational part of the conference was not nearly as extensive as it is now.
Yeah, and I view that one as the trigger point was probably Annapolis, and that elected with Richard Donovan, and Brenda Argo was president at the time. Yes. I think that was really it. I mean, it was always, when you had Nacum there, that's the big elephant in the room. And they'd have thousands of people attend. And we'd have 60, NCBC members. It was. But those 60 or 70 or 80 or 100, I think, in the Washington one, would get the benefits of this large institution. Well, now we've become a large institution ourselves and can draw on faculty not only from Washington, from the FJC and the AO, and from the courts, but we can draw on some public sector people to come in. I think that helps build the education program.
Did you hold a board position before you became vice president?
No. No. I was always involved in the education program, obviously having held a conference and a successful one, and then working with the subsequent courts as either part of the education committee or something. Nothing. No, it was actually somebody in Ken's office who nominated me, Ken Gardner in Illinois Northern. I really hadn't thought much about it. I had actually just come off being chair of the Bankruptcy Courts Advisory Group. And so I was actually looking for a break, and then had a 6-year sentence as vice president, president, and president, immediate past president.
So it wasn't really your decision so much as it was a nomination.
It was a nomination. I accepted it. I mean, I was excited about it. I had ideas that I wanted to implement, and so it wasn't like I turned it down. I have to admit that.
Let's talk a little bit about your term as president. What were some of the issues that the NCBC was facing at that time, and how did they choose to handle those issues or not handle them, as the case may be?
Yeah, I'm not much for not handling. It was a busy time. We had just had a very successful conference in Cincinnati, but a very expensive conference in Cincinnati in terms of hits in the budget. We learned a lot from that conference of things not to do for future conferences, and so my administration took over from that. So we were financially we were not in a good way. We had taken a big hit with the hotel. Had to do with the guaranteed rooms, the number of rooms we had guaranteed versus the fallout that occurred. And then some AV issues, which I view as not that big an issue, and then some basically wheeling out cartloads of water, which drove up some of the food costs at that conference. So we had some financial issues, but we also had some big political issues. So my goal was build the membership, stabilize the dues structure. We actually cleaned it up during that time so that there were all kinds of layers of dues, and we made that go away. And I thought the best way to get membership and to get people interested was to put on a great conference and to be involved in important political issues. And by political, I mean important to the bankruptcy courts. And there were no shortage of those during that 6-year window. We were faced with the IBM study on administrative services, which many people refer to as the shared services study. We very successfully challenged its results. That study, although the issue of sharing administrative services voluntarily still remains, and certainly there are courts that do it and are successful with it, the tenor of the IBM study was that should be forced upon people. Even though there's successful sharing going on between courts of the same type. And that was one of the things we pointed out in our white paper that we put together. And we had the advantage at that point of the president of NCBC having been former Corks Advisory Group chair, and the vice president of NCBC being the Corks Advisory Group chair that followed me, and that'd be Ken Gardner. And so we put together a joint paper. And it basically looked at all aspects of the IBM study, some of which were just statistically flawed, and others were just flawed in its assumptions. And we pointed out the benefits of lateral sharing as opposed to within a district, that that there are courts that develop software applications that assist other courts of like type, in our case bankruptcy, and that's a sharing that wasn't talked about in the IBM context. And those types of sharing save. I mean, if you go to Ed's place, I don't know what the numbers are today, but at one point it was 70% of the applications in automation for sharing on Ed's place are bankruptcy court applications. What's amazing when you look at them is how few of them are duplicates. In other words, yeah, there are 3 or 4 or 5 calendar applications, but there are hundreds of judges. So even that isn't an unusual number. And they do things differently because they meet different practices within chambers. And that's an example of the worst amount of duplication there is in there. What isn't in there is 25 cash register applications. There's one, and then there's J. Finz's, or Finz's has an old cash register some courts use, and there might be a few others out there, but in its place it's basically a cash register application. There's lots of CMECF enhancements, there's quick fixes. That's how we operate, and that's what we pointed out in the shared services study. That was one. We fought a battle over, we were going to take a disproportionate budget cut in 2005, 12% cut to bankruptcy, where everybody else was taking 3, 4, and 5%. We fought that battle and were successful, and of course the budget came in a little better than expected. Let's see, politically, which I call the advocacy front, slipping my mind at the moment. Light bulb went off because I looked down at my notes. It's amazing what happens when that happens. One of the things that was going on during that period, and it's changed a little bit because the work measurement process has changed, but it was always a matter of how low can we take you in the work measurement process. That's at least the perception from the courts. And show me what work you're not doing that you should be doing that you're not doing because you lack resources. That's always been an argument they make. And no individual court was effectively arguing back. Well, what I did as president was I created a task force on resource allocation. And that group met in Newark to show that we don't meet in beautiful places all the time. We were in Newark, New Jersey. Jim Waldron hosted us, and I brought together a bunch of subject matter experts from the work measurement process. Gary Drake, who recently retired, Diane Zeck, who's now a clerk, Richard Heltzel, Beverly Bone, who was the staffer at the AO on work measurement, Jim Waldron. I can't remember who else off the top of my head. We came together and we prepared a white paper on work measurement, looking at issues of work that courts aren't doing because the resources aren't there, work that they should be doing, explaining some of the differences in how people do their work in bankruptcy, but also some of the efficiencies that have been gained through the years through automation. And I think it was very helpful. And the dialogue on work measurements changed. The process is different than it was before. The courts that self-measure now come in statistically very close to the courts that they go out and visit. So I think we started to change the dialogue on work measurement. The last piece of advocacy, and it's funny because I had dinner with Glenn Paulman in San Diego this week, who's chief of the Bankruptcy Court Administration Division. And I said, but the thing that I think was the most important thing I've ever done in my whole career was when the light bulb went off post-BAP-CEPA, when the new law came into effect in 2005, and I saw there was a workload difference between the old cases and the new cases in the clerk's office, and quantified that, and made a presentation at the AO to Assistant Director Noel Augustin and Assistant Director Peter McCabe and Glenn, and had a bunch of staffers in the room, and showed them the difference of the pre and post workload. Remember, there wasn't a new formula at that point showing that. And that put us in a holding pattern. Well, that piece of work led to a more extensive review to validate the data beyond my data. And it did. It basically showed the same pattern. It led to a work measurement formula that ultimately went up from the old formula, which it should have per case, given the additional work requirements of the new law. But most importantly, it put us in a hold for a couple of years, where if you looked at the filings, which dropped nationally to a bottom, it put us in a hold. And that was probably the most important thing I did in my whole career, because there was a lot of people interested in slashing the bankruptcy courts to the bone, given the filing drop and the perceived lack of work. And it gave everybody a chance to sort of step back, take a breath, and let's see what happened. And not only did the work measurement formula validate that there was more work, but then the filings returned. Yes. So we sort of saved jobs on two levels. And I think that's a key part that NCBC can play in this process, is this sort of like keeping an eye on the horizon and seeing what's out there. And I know that all these things that I just talked about, which is a lot, the board, I'm the kind of guy who sends drafts around and has already getting input and stuff. These weren't just letters I generated and sent in. I had my board actively involved in editing and reading these things over, and it made them feel engaged in it. I think that was really important. Great boards, both times. From the time I was vice president, and immediate president, great groups of people involved in the process, mostly deputy clerks. It's not all clerks. So it's a great group. We had a money issue. I think we showed that we were concerned about the membership and the institution by these advocacy things. I think that brought members in. And then we had two great conferences. I mean, we had Chicago, which was with FCCA, probably the last one we may ever have combined because both conferences have gotten so large. And then we had Newport, which was just beautiful. The education programs of both were top notch. I don't think anybody can touch them. I mean, they were just awesome, although I can say it's built since then. They were great. In my mind, they were the greatest. Heck, last year was great in Pittsburgh too. So I think we've had great conferences. Those are mine. Those are my babies. So they'll always be special to me. But I think it really solidified that educational role that NCBC fulfills. So it was kind of like we had just created that new seal with sort of solutions, leadership, and advocacy. And I think that we hit all three sides of the triangle during my presidency, with working with the board, working with the membership. It was a lot of fun.
And am I right in recalling that it was during that time that you were involved as either vice president, president, or immediate past, that the conferences kind of changed from just let's pick a city and go to a clerk actually hosting?
Yeah, we did. It was really fun watching that happen. I have to admit. Yeah, it did move from a sort of travel agency model of, hey, we always wanted to go to wherever, Orlando. I'll make that up. We did go. The conference did go to Orlando at one point before my time. But it became exciting to host. I think that really started with Richard in Annapolis, and then me, and then Bernie hosted in Montana, and Karen hosted in Miami. But it really, at this point, what we saw different in Chicago and Newport were people then started stepping up and saying, we want to host. And so now we're at that point where we actually had a bid package come in for the conferences that are coming up. And that's just fun.
Where the whole court gets into.
Well, the whole court's getting involved. It's not just the clerk. It's here we, in this coming year, it's 2 districts in Louisiana, neither of which are particularly large. Heck, Pittsburgh's a big city, but Pittsburgh's staffing is not huge. And so here you have this combined thing, which is how we pulled off Newport. It was Newport and it was Rhode Island and Maine, yes. Jointly hosting and working on the conference. That's actually a neat turning event. I mean, for next year, we're going to San Francisco. Baltimore was in there. Indianapolis, I think, was interested. It's really kind of exciting right now. Oh, there were the podcasts and the impact too, but that's for another day.
Now let's talk about the podcast a little bit.
They were fun.
That was a real innovation.
That was fun
for the time.
Yeah, it was. I think Patrick and I still it's like Ken pushed us to keep going. We would have kept going, but there just didn't seem to be that focus, so we didn't. It was another way to try to generate interest. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure we got people to Newport. And so we had a lot of fun doing the radio show, so to speak, to sort of get that interest going for Newport. So we had segments on the show that had Celia and Susan talking to us. We also had one of the staffers there, How to Speak Rhode Island, did a segment on that. We had some trivia contests. We were giving away some things. It was fun, and we regret that it just sort of like, part of it was, I'm not president anymore, and it's like somebody, it's like trying to decide to keep driving the train. Where did the train pull in the station and we're done? And I think there was a little bit of that at that point. Our vision was to keep going and to try to then do interviews with, with like Glenn Paulman through the year, or when issues would come up, and try to do some issues like that. Of course, then the FJTN launched too, which hadn't existed. So now you had interview shows on the FJTN. You've now got most of that stuff streaming out through the JNet. So some of the need has changed too. But we did have fun doing them. We also took the impact to the web. It was a printed publication.
Yes.
And that just was a cost savings thing, given the money situation we were in at the beginning. But kind of closing the loop on the money thing is we ended up definitely in the black during my term, and handed that over to the next president. So I felt much better about that. What happened to us in Cincinnati was really not anybody's fault. I mean, it was just a series of weird events, unanticipated, things that came up budget related in terms of courts canceling, but then not. And it was the second hotel's contract, not the first hotel, that gave us the grief. So the things that you sort of do quickly is what usually costs you at a conference. The things you plan for are fine. And so it wasn't anything past president had done or anything. It was just sort of a series of events. I know that my predecessor was beating himself up for like a year. But we got it back. And the third piece of that, I guess, is the insurance programs, which became much more vital and continue that way right now. And they are a source of revenue for the organization, but they're also an employee benefit that isn't provided by the federal government. And who knows in the future where more gaps may show up that way as budgets get tighter.
While we're talking about the future, I guess one of the clouds on the horizon for the next several years is budgetary constraints. And do you see that adversely affecting the NCBC conference? And I speak of the annual conference as to how that may affect attendance.
I think clerks are going to have to make their own decisions about that. Could it? Yes, it could. I mean, courts are going to make those decisions about how they spend their money. I kind of have a different worldview, but I think that's my background as a trainer and having been a trainer. My court downsized, which is the way you say, laid off people and such, and transferred people to the courts. I mean, we went from 80 positions to 45. And so it was a rather significant downsize over about a 7-year period. It was a combination of new work measurement formulas that was during that black period of the way the process worked, a couple bad budgets, one horrible judiciary budget, and drop in filings. California, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, where you now see filings at record levels, at this point in 2011, they were actually at their lowest levels during when most courts were actually operating in fairly good shape. So we lost a lot of bodies. LA lost almost half its workforce, I think, was the numbers in the Central District, went from 400 to 200 positions. Not everyone was filled, we all kept our cushions and such. But what I'm getting at is I still send people to NCBC because even during that downturn and even during that time when I'm transferring people or downsizing, there are people who are still going to be working there and they need something to help them focus on their jobs. And if the training program is valid, it's actually a relatively low-cost event to give your employees. And so I think that's my hope, is that the NCBC conference, if it continues to evolve and grow in terms of the education program, the quality of the programs, the clerks, even in tough economics times, see the value in continuing a training effort for their staffs. You can't let people get stagnant in their jobs. And they're going to feel, let's face it, we're all going to feel dumped on the next couple of years. I mean, we're going to read it in the newspapers every day about how bad federal employees are, and we'll be wrapped up in that. And the bottom line is there's no more dedicated group of people than the bankruptcy court clerk's office staff. We deal with people who have real financial problems every day. And most of those financial problems are at really no fault of the person who's filing at the counter. Husband and wife, one loses their job, they were living on 2 incomes, they can pay all their bills, but once one income's gone, it's only so long you can survive. You're underwater on your house. In California, so you can't even sell it for what you owe on it to then be able to get back in shape. And bankruptcy tends to then be the only solution. And our staffs deal with those type of people every day.
I want to come back while we're on the subject of education to the MSU program. I know that was something that was kind of handed off to you, but you have really run with it, and now we've had our first group of graduates from the MSU program. Talk a little bit about that and how you see that as being important to the bankruptcy community.
Yeah, I think that the MSU Judicial Administration program, the certificate one, is the one that's non-academic credit at this point. Provides an opportunity for staff, especially deputy clerks who do sort of operational work, but anybody. As a matter of fact, we've got a couple of clerks taking it with their staff, which is interesting right now. So it's like this sort of like office camaraderie thing going on. But I think it provides a unique opportunity to learn about sort of the clerk's office and the management of a clerk's office operation beyond your little world of being a public services clerk, intake, case management, courtroom deputy. But there are supervisors and there are managers in there also. So you get a chance to sort of get a breadth of knowledge regarding finance and budget and HR and IT management without necessarily being in those positions. And that helps. Actually, in that graduating class, there are now, there's at least one chief deputy who was a mid-level manager before, and then another one I know who graduated and got a promotion, moved to another district and was promoted. I'm not sure what level, I think actually into management from non-management. And so it has some benefits. And I know it came up in the interview, the one who's now a chief deputy, it came up in her interview. The program's been interesting. It's not anywhere near as academically rigorous as perhaps some would like it to be. Because it does, it is during these conferences. My biggest challenge, I'm actually struggling with this year, is to try to give people a chance to go to something else. Because we're a little shorter conference than, for example, FCCA. We're 1 day shorter. And that 1 day is kind of the difference between being able to go have some fun in a workshop you want to go to and being all in MSU classes. And so our folks are pretty much all in MSU classes unless I can work a keynote into giving credit. And that's what we did in St. Petersburg, was because we had leadership at the beginning and at the end, we used the leadership plenary sessions for leadership credit. And that gave them a lot of free time. This year's conference in New Orleans, it's Human Resources Management, Finance, and Budget. It's not a whole lot of options, but I am working on a couple that I hope to resolve this week. That we might be able to give them at least one session where they get a chance to see somebody who isn't MSU. But we've had a great show. As a matter of fact, it's funny because in preparation for the board meeting that I'll be attending tomorrow as part of the Education Committee and as the MSU liaison, our case flow management class had 100% satisfaction in the eval last year. That is a 7-hour, all-day workshop on case flow management that I co-taught with Brian Carr, who's the court from Arizona. And I had not really paid attention. I'm not a big evaluation person. Should be, I'm not. And I happened to notice, I was actually looking for some other information in there on the peer-to-peer sessions, and suddenly I realized that case flow management, 100%. It was like, wow, we had a lot of fun in that workshop. We made it, we covered all the core material that a state court person would need to know about case flow management, because civil and criminal are part of that class. They have to have that general curriculum, but we also then used bankruptcy court examples, and we used a lot of movie clips, and it broke up the day. And so I had not noticed that until today. So I think that's part of the fun of the MSU program is you can be creative up to a point as long as you cover the key result areas, the key material that has to be covered. And that was actually fun to see. It's been fun to do.
So we're into the second cycle of
We are into the second cycle. We don't, my understanding, because I actually have this prepared for tomorrow, is that we may have a couple of graduates this year, but we have a lot for next year if they all finish their work. The challenge we have, and I know that Ken Hers, who's the current president, is about to send out his membership letter, and he's going to pitch the MSU thing, is if you don't come every year, you get out of cycle. And once you're out of cycle, you're out of cycle. So in other words, it's 5 years to complete the program, and you need to take the courses in 5 years. And a lot of courts will mix up who they send to NCBC to give us spread it around the office, and they don't necessarily consider the fact that somebody took MSU and wants to keep going to MSU. So they miss a year, and once they miss a year, they're kind of done, unless they go online and take the class, and it costs the same. So we're now, each year now, we're identifying for the students the classes, and then we're identifying the alternate classes that they can take so that if they don't come in a given year, they can always get online, or if they miss a class, they can always get online and take it. Your cost's the same. It's the same, charge from MSU, which I think is between $600 and $800 for the 5 years. I'm not exactly sure what the total is. But it's a really minimal cost. And some courts do tuition reimbursement for programs, but that's a local court decision, so I'm not going to advocate one way or the other, but some of the graduates and some of the people attending the program are getting reimbursed for those costs once they either complete the program or complete the class and pay for it. And so it's got a lot of flexibility for people. Several AO classes and several FJC classes are certified. So if they happen to take the leadership program at the FJC, the Federal Court Leadership Program, and they go through that program, that counts as the leadership credit for MSU. And so you don't have to take that leadership class at the NCBC conference, for example. And actually for this HR and finance piece, that stuff's going online at the Judiciary Online University. So I don't think this year we'll offer that as an alternative, but it will be. That if somebody missed it this year, that they probably can take those classes. And it's just been an exciting thing. And as I said, we'll have a couple of graduates likely this year, but next year we have a big class, and we had, believe it or not, for case flow management, we had over 80 people in the room. And that's coming in a day early and spending 8 hours almost on case flow management. So I think that group's got some really diehard people, and hopefully we'll hang on to them this year. We have Terry Curry coming to do the HR management program from Michigan State, and he's terrific. And then we actually have the finance and budget folks from the AO coming in to do the finance and budget piece, which is the budget fundamentals course that they offer budget analysts. So they'll get a lot of the same sort of sense of how it all works, but it'll obviously be an abbreviated class. They'll take 2 hours worth of material down to 5 hours of hopefully not too boring material. And that's this year's conference.
Last year in Pittsburgh, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the NCBC, which was really, really exciting. Having been president and being still very much engaged in the NCBC, what do you see as its role in the future? What issues do you see on the horizon, and what should NCBC be moving toward in terms of leadership and advocacy and education?
I think it's always going to have to keep its I'm trying to figure out the expression, but it's more like sniffing the air to see what's coming. Clearly the budget's going to be an issue the next several years, and clearly, not so clearly, but there's almost always a perception that bankruptcy's got too much. I don't know if that's going to come up again, but we don't fill vacancies perhaps as quickly because we are always concerned about the ups and downs of our filings. You have to try to cushion against, frankly, what I went through, and other courts have gone through. So I think NCBC needs to always be aware from an advocacy front of those issues that confront the bankruptcy courts. And the federal judiciary. I mean, frankly, this budget thing is not just a bankruptcy court issue; it's a judiciary issue, and it's a government issue, and it's a tough economic time right now. Although, knock on wood, it's getting better. It's a slow getting better, but it's getting better. Of course, that also means at some point our filings will change again, but that's okay too. Better a strong economy and a few less cases. I'll probably take that as a person. May not be in my best selfish interest, but it's certainly better for everybody. But there's a lot of challenges on that front, and I guess that's sort of the advocacy front. On the education front, I think we're in really good shape. I mean, I think that the conferences will continue to be strong. Financially, you have to be careful about some things because, if people don't keep coming, we could get ourselves a little bit into the situation we had in Cincinnati. But I think we're much smarter at our contracting. We're much smarter in our use of resources and our conference management, let's say. Our educational program, I think New Orleans is going to be wonderful. It's a great city. It's a city that struggled to come back a little bit like the bankruptcy courts in some ways. But we have come back, and it's come back. There's new challenges with the next generation CMECF. A lot of us who were involved at NCBC are also involved in that project, and that's going to be. It's not going to be the revolutionary change that ECF was, because we've made that leap from paper to electronic in most instances. But it's another evolutionary thing, and I think maybe that's my answer about NCBC is it's probably not a revolutionary change coming in the next 5-10 years, but it's an evolutionary change. And that's on the education front, that's on the advocacy front, is we just got to keep pushing all parts of that triangle. I know that my understanding is the insurance programs are about to be on some even more solid ground with the organization. I think that's nice because it provides some membership support. The idea of what NCBC gets from those programs, from the insurance programs, like any association, AARP being the master of all insurance programs, is a certain amount of revenue that is meant to support the membership. And that's where you have that cushion to help you during a tough time or a bad conference. And that's helpful. So it kind of comes back to us too. So I think it's an evolution in the next 5 or 10 years, but clearly the biggest issue I think we face is the budget. I mean, I don't think that'll surprise anybody. I think the bankers courts have a proven resiliency time and time again from all the battles that have been fought, and are able to come back stronger and better each time. And I think that's where we are on that front too. So we'll come through pretty much anything.
What do you see that the NCBC can continue to do or might be able to do even better to keep its membership active and involved?
The one thing I've been thinking about lately is the impact and the communications process. It kind of goes back to the discussion about the podcast. I'm not sure, and actually this has nothing to do with the editors of the impact right now. I'm just not sure we're generating the interest in it as a document that perhaps we've had. We've had peaks and valleys with it historically for 30 years. Like, this is not anything new. I think all organizations, all courts that have like internal employee newsletters go through this. Like send me the employee newsletters every, whenever it's supposed to be, every week or every 2 weeks, and then it's every month, and then it's every quarter, and then it's once in a blue moon when they got some pictures from the holiday party to put out. I think the impact's had a little bit of that, where and I know this even when we were managing it within my office, is the ebb and flow of articles coming in and trying to make sure that we're getting those articles that we got. And I think that the one thing that I have seen, and this is not anything I did because I am not good at this, is we've gotten way better at documenting our process and to hand off to the next generation of board members and things like that. And that sort of happened. It started to happen because Susan Thurston said she would put together her book for her conference from Newport and hand it off to the next one. And that book became the basis to start building. But I give all the credit to the current president when he was vice president, and the current vice president who will be president, meaning Ken Hers and John Horner, who wanted to document the heck out of the association. And I think that's going to really pay dividends downstream, because I'm much more of an oral historian. And Ken Gardner, my successor and former chief deputy and colleague, is a lot like me. It takes somebody like, with that slightly different Myers-Briggs profile of a Ken Hers or a John Horner to say, you know what, we need to write this stuff down, and they have. And so there's that it'll get easier for future board members, so run for the board. It'll get easier for future board members and easier for future presidents and officers because there'll be now sort of a written document that explains sort of the roles and responsibilities and past history. And these videotapes, I think, will be downstream of sort of the past history. And so I think the communications process, and actually I know Ken's got a big membership thing going out, which will include MSU stuff and some other material to both the clerks and the membership. That was the other thing, is one of the other dynamics that I remember doing, and I know that's been followed since then, is I've been tapping into the clerks list, rather than just communicating with members, either through members' email list or now members' clicks. I was communicating with the clerks' email list, as if everybody was a member, whether they were or weren't. And at one point we got it up to, I think, 78 of the clerks, especially during this advocacy stuff. And that I think is important. And I see Ken and John sort of following that stuff, the next two presidents.
Any last thoughts, words of wisdom, gazing into the crystal ball that you want to do?
No, I think, Bob Wiley was the one who said it to me, past president, clerk, both in Utah and in Virginia Eastern. When we were in Washington, and we're having our little, NACM was there with its, 1,000 members, and then we were, 40 of us in a side room meeting as the NCBC business meeting. Bob said to me something like, I just love this organization. This is his line, and it's like, I love this organization. I love what it's become, and I love the people. I love meeting all the deputy clerks and working with the deputy clerks. I love being in the classes. It's a great conference, and it's it's not bad being in great cities. New Orleans is great. San Francisco is a wonderful city. I mean, I'm amazed, that we were actually able to pull that off. It's really, we've always fought for hotel rates in California. It's a problem because California doesn't have seasons. We have seasons. Northern California actually has more seasons than we do, although actually summer is not the best season. The coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco. It's like a line. But the reality is that San Diego, we don't have seasons, so hotels don't bid an off-season, which is typically what we play on to get good conference rates. So it becomes very hard to get that. Well, with the economy, the rates are available. And so you get a chance to come to San Francisco, you get a chance to be in New Orleans, and wherever after that, I think maybe Baltimore is right here. So great cities to visit.
Barry, thanks for all that you have done in advocating for the NCBC throughout your years as membership, and definitely for the way you pushed it forward in the education field. Thank you very much.
Thank you.